Thanks for everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Bully Resistance Show. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that there's two ways that you can actually help me continue the fight against bullying in the public schools. First, if you haven't subscribed to the Bully Resistance Show, it doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is just go to my website at www.davebond.org, and you'll see the banner and that says subscribe, and all you have to do is just click on that. The second way that you can help, you can be a monthly sponsor as low as $4 per month, and in return, you're going to get a free weekly digital download of a track of mine or a song of mine from the CDs that I have out, and also a monthly digital download CD. Now this way, you're not just giving money away, but you're getting something in return. So all you have to do is just go to my website at www.davebond.org, scroll down and click on the Patreon banner, and it's going to take you to get you or to give you some more information about that. So with no further ado, sit back and enjoy the next Bully Resistance Show.
Welcome, everyone, to the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells, nationally known smooth jazz artist, CEO and co-founder of the Chocolate Jazz Foundation, and the co-host of a 2-hour syndicated radio program called Chocolate Jazz Radio. Bully Resistance is a weekly 1-hour show that's a motivational, informative, and inspirational program. We will have interviews with musicians, actors, government officials, politicians, psychologists, counselors, and just average day citizens. Of course, the topics will include making right choices, never giving up desire, discipline, determination, bullying in public schools or workplace and in your community, bully resistance and prevention, self-defense, jiu-jitsu, and current affairs, and much, much more. And if you're ready, we are. Here's your host, David Wells.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Bully Resistance Show. My name is David, and today we have a guest that is running for governor in the state of West Virginia. He has attended Harvard College and received his master's at London School of Economics. So at this time, I want to introduce Stephen Smith on the Bully Resistance Show. Stephen, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Thanks. You know, before we get started, what I usually ask, I ask the person I'm interviewing if you can just give us a little bit more background about where you were born and raised, and actually what made you want to get into politics.
I'd be happy to. So I was born in Charleston, West Virginia 40 years ago. I learned from my parents at a very young age that we were put here on this planet to serve each other and do what's right by each other, not to accumulate lots of stuff. What that looked like was watching my dad help start the West Virginia Coalition for the Homeless and the Public Defender Services here in West Virginia, and watching my mom raise not just me and my sister, but foster kids and extended family members and neighborhood kids. Like a lot of families, ours moved away. We moved to Texas when I was 9. I, as you said, graduated from Harvard, met my wife in Chicago. The way I got into this line of work, by which I mean fighting poverty and inequality and working in communities, was as a student on campus 20 years ago. Students joined hands with janitors and security guards and cooks to fight a 4-year living wage campaign, trying to make sure that every worker on campus was making enough money to live above the poverty line. And after 4 years of campaigning and a 3-week sit-in where we didn't leave the president's office for 3 weeks, and an eventual arrest, a few of us getting arrested side by side, we finally forced the university's hand and won a living wage on campus. And it wow. taught me that, you know, things don't change just because you're right or because you have a good argument or sure. Because you've done your research. Things only change when we're willing to take risks, when we're willing to build more power than our opponents. And in some cases, we have to force them to do what they don't want to do. if what they're doing is the wrong thing. So for the last 20 years, I've had the incredible good fortune to work on the side of poor and working people, first in Chicago and then moving back home to West Virginia. For most of the last 8 years, I ran an anti-poverty organization here in the state that basically did two things. One is that we recruited, trained, and funded more than 300 rural teams to solve their own problems in their own backyard. So whether that meant starting a community garden or an after-school program or a small business, more than 300 projects we saw from soup to nuts. The other thing we do is every year we would send 700, 800, 900 children and families up to the Capitol to serve as the lobbyists and advocates for people who don't have high-priced lobbyists.
Nice.
And it became very clear. So on the one hand, it worked, that we were able to win more than 26 policy victories in those years, things like raising the minimum wage and expanding school breakfast programs. That was the good news.
Yes.
The bad news was that we very quickly learned that the people we were sending to the Capitol were 10 times smarter and more compassionate and more courageous than the lobbyists that we permit to run our government. And so the idea of our campaign for governor is that one governor isn't going to solve all our problems, one politician isn't the answer, but we're trying to win the closest thing our state has ever had to a people's government,
Sure.
where the people who work the hardest and sacrifice the most are also the folks who are writing the laws. So that's what we're up to.
You know, one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting when I was putting the show together, like you mentioned, I saw where you went to Plano High School in Texas, and I actually was raised in Dallas, Texas, and I went to DeSoto High School, which was about, I think, maybe 45, maybe even less away from Plano High School. And
that's right. That's right. We have that in common.
So I'm not for sure if you watch football. I know I don't like I used to, but I have to ask you: are you a Dallas fan?
I am a Cowboys fan.
Are you?
To this day, I am. I know it's.
I'm only.
I'm a hard thing to be sometimes, but you can't. That's where I was from age 9 to age 18. There's those formative years where you form those attachments to sports teams, and so I'm a Cowboys fan and a Dallas Mavericks fan too. Are you?
Matter of fact, I guess they're having the NFL drafts tonight at 8 and going through Sunday, but I've never watched that though.
No, me neither. I'm not a big professional football fan, but when I root for somebody, that's who I root for.
Hey, Stephen, a lot of listeners already know about my experience going to school in Texas. But let me ask you this. But when you were going to school in Texas, if it's through elementary, middle, or high school, do you remember hearing the word bullying, or did you just hear the word like teasing or picking on?
That's such a great question. I don't. And I don't have the best memory in the world, but I do not remember hearing the word bullying attached to the kinds of things that kids dealt with in school until I was an adult. I do not remember people talking in those terms as a kid.
Let me ask you this. When you were going to school, what kind of experience was it like going to school in Texas? I mean, did you ever get bullied, or did you see people get bullied?
Both. So I was an overweight kid for most of my childhood, and so I got bullied some for that, certainly not as bad as other folks. And
Sure.
then my other way into the issue was that I was at various times in 7th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, I was part of a group in North Texas called Peer Assistance Leadership. It was an actual class that you could take, but you were meant to be students who were on the front lines of trying to help out and set a good example and just kind of tend to and look after kids who might otherwise be having a hard time. And again, I don't remember us calling it bullying, but looking for ways to step in, looking for ways to befriend and link up with and mentor younger kids who were having a hard time through no fault of their own. So that's how I came to experience, in some respects, both sides of the issue of the problem.
Right. For I'm not for sure if you know, but for about 7-8 years during the school year, I spent about 90% of my time going into the public schools. A lot in West Virginia, but also a lot like in Tennessee and Indiana and Ohio. And one of the things as a professional musician, I saw the part of the interview that you had with Todd Birch, which I thought was awesome that you did that. But as I travel, as a jazz artist, and I would, be sitting down for dinner, and they would ask me, "So Dave, where are you from?" And when I say from West Virginia, they get this look in their face like, "West Virginia?" And it's just like, it was like a disgusted look, and I'm just trying to read into what they're saying. And so West Virginia has a stigma. I'm really, even though I was raised in Dallas, Texas, I just see how they make fun of West Virginia and the poverty and everything else. But what you can't run away from, West Virginia is ranked in the top 5 from grades 9 through 12, being the most electronically bullied. They're in the top 5 most bullied on school property. Then you're dealing with, we're in the top, I think maybe number 1 or number 2 with the most divorce rates, and then ranked in the top 5. I know at one time we were, I think, maybe number 1 with the most drug overdoses. Tell me why you think this is. Why is West Virginia so stricken with all this negativity?
Because we've been robbed. That you can't do the kind of trauma that has been done to the people of West Virginia for the last 156 years and not expect that trauma to seep in, not expect there to be consequences. So it is not an exaggeration to say that our state has been run for the benefit of people and out-of-state corporations that don't live here and don't care what destruction they wrought. And that was true 156 years ago. It was true 100 years ago during the mine wars. And it's true today that if you look at the tax code of West Virginia, every inch of that tax code is rigged so that the people who have the most pay the least, and the people who have the least pay the most. And when you do that kind of harm, generation after generation after generation, doesn't matter which party's in power, your life keeps getting worse, your kid's life keeps getting worse. We're asking families to bear more and more and more of the burden. We're asking schools to bear more and more and more of the burden. We can't be surprised when we see historically high levels of mental illness, suicide, violence, domestic violence, bullying, and until we seek a government and an economy that puts working families ahead of the interests of these giant, faceless, out-of-state corporations, we're going to keep repeating these crises. The thing that gives me hope, though, David, is that West Virginia is also number 1 in the nation in the amount of time we spend with our neighbors, top 5 in things like charitable giving, volunteer service, military service, the time we spend with friends and families. 100 years ago, we led a strike wave started by our mine workers. 2 years ago, we started a strike wave nationally begun by our educators. That the way one of our supporters put it, she said, West Virginia has the worst leaders and the best people. And that's what gives me hope, that time and time again, the people of West Virginia pull off amazing things, in some respects because we're forced to, while our leaders continue to sell us out to these out-of-state interests. And the idea of our campaign, the idea, I think, of much of the reform work you're doing around schools and bullying is, if we put compassionate neighbors in charge of policy and reform instead of putting corporate lobbyists in charge of reform, we're going to get the kind of schools and roads and state government that we deserve.
Right. I don't mean to jump around, but we're with time, I want to go ahead and get into your plans as a governor. A couple months ago, I had Luke Winters on my show, and who's running for, I guess, District 10 in the House of Delegates, and someone that I would personally endorse. But I remember during the interview, and I told him this, I don't think it was during the interview, I think it was before the interview, that I had no intentions using my podcast as a platform for politics. But after the first interview that I had with him, I mean, the response from the listeners was incredible. And so so it started making me think, as I jump into this, because I really never got caught up into politics, but as I've been researching with him and then dealing with you and the issues, I'm thinking, wow, this is really interesting. So anyway, I was thinking, well, gosh, if someone that might be running for office might benefit me and what I do in public schools, why not have them on the show and listen to their views? So one of the first things one of the first things I saw on your website, I thought was really interesting, and I had no idea that this was even happening. And it was about the prosecute corrupt politicians and corrupt criminals. And you mentioned about how we have two justice systems, one for the rich and one for the rest of us, maybe something. But anyway, can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you plan to fix that?
Sure. First, let me just appreciate your interview with Luke, and Luke in particular. Luke and I are two of 93 candidates all across the state of West Virginia that are running for office in a fundamentally different way. We can't be bought and paid for because we refuse to take money from corporate PACs and corporate lobbyists and big pharmaceutical companies. And so I think part of the reason people reacted strongly to Luke's interview is because we really are doing something different. And frankly, it's working. I think even better than we had hoped. So to answer your question, this is, on the one hand, it's an incredible thing. On the other hand, it's probably what a lot of your listeners might expect. So we have 700, give or take, 700 state police officers in West Virginia. That's a pretty sizable force to do some real good. Right now, 0 of those 700 state police officers are given the freedom to work on corporate crime as their main beat. So wage theft, mine safety, whatever corporate crime you can think of. Meanwhile, we also have 0 of the 700 who are given the freedom to work on political corruption as their main beat. The corruption that we see in our roads and building projects and campaign finance laws. Right. And so as a people, as an electorate, we can't be surprised when corporate crime and political corruption run rampant in our state when there's literally no one there to police it. And so one of the platforms, one of the plans you'll see on our platform, and our platform was written by the people of West Virginia at 197 town halls and 11,000 one-on-one conversations with voters, is that they said we need a state police force that can go after corporate criminals and corrupt politicians, the real bad guys, the ones that are actually stealing from us in a big way, and not so much waste our money on policing and jailing and imprisoning people for being sick or people for being poor. And I thought that was a really encouraging thing, especially to see the state police officers we talked to themselves were enthusiastic. They said, look, we got into this because we wanted to go after the real bad guys, the guys at the top, not folks who are sick and living on the street and have nowhere else to go.
Wow. I was doing a little bit of research. Now, I want you to know this, and listeners, I want you all to know that everything that we read online is not always true. We can talk, people can have their views about something and never change no matter the facts. For example, my brother is probably one of the best chiropractors in Parkersburg that I know. Now, one of the questions that I asked you, Stephen, in my first email was if you have any hobbies, and one of my hobbies is jiu-jitsu. and I compete against guys that are 30 years, around 30 years old, and I'm 54, turning 55. Gosh, man, I'm 55 in May. Oh,
good for you. Go, knock them dead.
Yeah, man. So anyway, so he's really good about keeping me on the mat and keep me at 100%. But still, I can tell these people all this good news and about a chiropractor, but they still have their poor views about this chiropractor. Now, the reason why I'm saying all this, I was reading on an article online, and it said the article was like voters rate politicians' corruption as America's biggest crisis. They said let me give you a couple of statistics. Let me see. 53% of voters believe political corruption is a crisis in the United States, while another 36% believe it is a significant problem. Also, it says that 87% of voters nationwide believe corruption is widespread in the federal government. Solid majorities believe there is 70% corruption in state and also 60. So it's about. My point is this: people see this. I know this. I know that I'm not excited about going to the voting booth and voting, and because I feel that there's a lot of bad taste in people's mouth because of the corruption, because they get people, going into office that aren't doing what they said they're going to be doing. So what makes you different than these so-called people that they're thinking that, they're corrupted and not going to do what they say they're going to do? Does that make sense?
It does. The difference is the thing that I always do and encourage other folks to do is don't look at the politician and what they say. Look at the people behind them, right? That at the end of the day,
right.
A single politician, a single leader can't do very much. And they're almost always there representing somebody. Now, in many cases in West Virginia history, you have people who are mostly representing themselves. So you have a lot of politicians that come in and they say, I'm going to put $2 million of my own money in the race. Well, then that's a politician that is there for himself.
Yeah, you're right.
And maybe a handful of his buddies. You have other politicians who say, well, I'm going to take money from anybody. And so you inevitably see the same characters pop up supporting those candidates, the same corporate political action committees, the same polluters, the same big pharmaceutical companies. And you can be sure that whatever they say during campaign time, when it's time to govern, it's those donors who they're going to answer to. Our campaign, we do two things that are fundamentally different. One, we refuse to take the money of corporate PACs, corporate lobbyists, big pharmaceutical companies, big energy companies, or out-of-state land holding companies. We don't want to owe those people anything. And we want you to know, or anyone who's voting, to know that we won't owe those people anything. The second thing we do is that we work really, really hard to secure small dollar donations because we do want to be accountable to the working families and working people of West Virginia. And so our campaign recently broke the record for most individual donations ever in a governor's race. And keep in mind, we've got more than 6 months till Election Day, and we already broke the record for most donations ever in a governor's race. To give you an example of what this looks like,
sure.
We did an analysis of our campaign compared to our main competitors. And our campaign has more than 480 donations from public educators, teachers, school service personnel. If you add up all of the donations that all of our other three main competitors have received, they have 8 donations combined from public educators. And if you want to know where we're going to stand or why our campaign's different, it's because of that. It's because the people backing us, the people who fuel our campaign, the people I'm going to be accountable to, the people who will have gotten me into office aren't the corporate PACs or corporate lobbyists. They're everyday working families. Another difference in our campaign is, and some people think this is a small thing, some people think it's a big thing. We just think it's an obvious thing. From the very beginning of the campaign, my email and phone number have been public information, and I spend hours every day talking to absolutely any voter in West Virginia who wants to be in touch with me.
Wow.
So you can judge for yourself.
Jeez.
Get on the phone with me, ask me whatever questions you want. Chances are we won't agree on everything because nobody ever finds a politician they agree with on everything.
Right.
But the knowledge that you have access to a person and that they, even if they disagree with you, it's not because someone has bought them off. That's a real difference. So I'll give it to you right now so your listeners can have it. 304-610-6512. That's my cell, 304-610-6512. If you try calling me right now, you won't get me because I'm on this podcast. But you can send me a text message. We can set up a call. You can call me. I'll call you back.
You're crazy,
email
Stephen.
is even better.
Jeez.
No, I'm not. Because people are... we actually trust the voters of West Virginia. And what we've actually found is that people are incredibly generous. They don't... I don't get my phone blown up by people. What I hear are real... terrible, thoughtful stories of what people are going through and how to make it better. I have not regretted once giving out my information.
Wow. You know, I want to go ahead and talk about something that's been affecting everyone, and it's the whole world, and it's the coronavirus. And this, you know what, this has destroyed people's lives. I mean, their jobs, their careers, education, their retirement, I mean, everything. And one of the things that I thought that was extremely impressive with you was how you had a website already up, detailed plan in motion to fight against the virus, and way before the state of West Virginia did. And from the time that this all started to today, there's so many people that have gone through so much stress and health issues and everything else. I mean, I was reading how a lot of us, matter of fact, I was talking with a lady that got her master's at Harvard and was in mental health. And I think it was actually, she specialized in trauma and recovery. And she actually lived in Brooklyn. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. And, so the space where she's living is really small, and that's one of the things that we talked about, how she was handling that. And she said, you know, one of the first things that was an eye-opener to all of us, especially in the building that I was at, was that they were next door. They were next door to a hospital, and they said that every so often they would see a line of bodies outside the hospital to be ready to be picked up. And she said, you know, that really hit home for us, you know. And I can remember this. 6 weeks I've actually been unemployed, and I've been a full-time musician for 20 years, just like, you know, with Todd. And I respect Todd, and I've seen Todd, and we've talked together in the past. But the first emotion or feelings that I felt was right after the government closed was like disbelief. I mean, I woke up in the morning and I'm thinking, gosh, is this just a dream? And then it was just reality, and happened day after day after day. And then people are dealing with anger, and there's sadness and acceptance and hope. You know, let me ask you this. So let's say, for instance, you are governor, and we are at the point where he is, you know, don't get me involved with, I mean, don't get me talking about Jim Justice, because I'm not a big fan. But you're the governor. You are taking over from this point on about reopening West Virginia. What steps would you take in reopening West Virginia from this point on, where we're at?
That's a great question. I think to answer the question, you have to first unfold in these times. And so I want to start there, and I promise I'll get to your question.
Okay.
The lie that gets told in West Virginia history, and this is true 100 years ago, it's true every time there's a crisis, it's especially true now, is that those in power tell us that we have a choice, that we have to choose between our health and our bank accounts. And this choice is a lie. This is the wealthiest time in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We can have economic relief to keep everybody afloat while also allowing people to stay home as long as they need to. Right. And that's the place I would start. If I were governor, if our administration were in power, we would be doing everything in our ability to shift the tax base and to shift the wealth in the state from the people who have too much to the people who don't have enough, so that everybody can safely and economically stay put as long as needed. That we don't think any life is worth risking in order to, quote unquote, get the economy up and rolling. The purpose of having an economy like the one we have, with enormous amounts of wealth, the purpose of having an economy like that, think of any community you're a part of, any family you're a part of, the reason to have wealth stored up is precisely so that we can take care of the least among us during a time of crisis. And yet, over and over, from both parties, we see during this crisis this false choice, this lie that says, well, you can either have your health and stay home, or you can have your bank account and go back to work, but you can't have both. And that's how we would think about this crisis. So in our minds, no economy, no piece of the economy gets reopened until doing so is airtight, meaning everyone's got the personal protective equipment they need. Everybody's able to stay home if they need be. There's universal testing and universal access to treatment. There's a way of tracking cases, which we still don't have in a serious way in West Virginia. And until all of those things are in place, we aren't going to do it. But it's not just about having those things in place. It's also about calling upon our economic resources to make sure that people can safely stay home and continue to eat and pay rent and keep their employees paid for if they're a small business. And what instead we've been seeing is a government that refused to act boldly in either case.
Right.
So they're
exactly.
They are, pardon my language, but they are half-assing the health side of things and half-assing the economic relief side of things, such that, for example, after everyone in our federal government and everyone in our state government promising that every small business would be made whole. How many times did you hear that phrase? You're going to be made whole.
Yeah.
The first round of paycheck protection comes down the pipe. There are more than 110,000 small businesses in West Virginia. How many got the relief? Less than 8,000.
Whoa.
Right? It does not have to be that way. We don't have to accept this version of reality that they've said to us.
Stephen, let me ask you this. I was watching Senator Manchin, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and one of the things I was shocked about, they asked him, they said, so how many tests have you done? And he said, and I thought there was a mistake. He said, we've only tested 26,000 people in a state of almost 2 million people. Whose fault is that? Because I'm thinking, we should have tested a lot more people than only 26,000. Do you agree with me, or do you feel like, okay, that's...
No, I absolutely agree with you, and we're lagging behind other countries in this regard. And the reason is because we have an economy, a government that refuses to call upon industry and the lobbyists who are accountable to those industries. Our government is very good at asking us to pitch in and make masks, and very bad at forcing those who are hoarding masks to give them up. And as a result, the people of West Virginia are far more capable of governing and getting through a crisis than the leadership of our state, because every time there is a crisis, we're the ones left holding the bag. We're the ones left figuring out the solution and figuring out the food distribution and figuring out the production. The fact that we have women on disability, barely with enough money to eat, making masks from home with no pay, while some companies are hoarding masks and other companies are laying off frontline workers, quote unquote, because of their bottom line, is a moral atrocity. Right. We should be ashamed by it, and we should be ready to replace any government that thinks that's okay.
And one last question with this, and then I want to go ahead and talk about a few more of your issues and wrap things up. As self-employed, of course, I've been self-employed for 20 years. My wife is a subcontractor and does title searching. Of course, I was extremely excited how they came out with CARES Act it was gig unemployment benefits. And that was, and I'm thinking that was probably when they approved that, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 4 or 6 weeks ago. For that amount of time, nobody has been able to get online to go ahead and fill out any type of paperwork to get it processed. And I've actually have, my wife is amazing. She, because the thing of it is that, we are about, we don't have much. And we have to try to get some income. And so she's on the computer the whole time, checking it 3 or 4 times a day. Whose fault is that? Why do you feel like it took that amount of time just to go ahead and get a website up? And I do websites, and it doesn't take long. So what? Yeah. So whose fault is that?
Yeah, it's our leaders' fault. I mean, in our campaign, we call it the Good Old Boys Club, right? Okay. The wealthy Good Old Boys Club, the folks who are always in charge of West Virginia. Sometimes they have a D after their name, sometimes they have an R after their name, but it's the same class of people. And for them, they're going to be fine, right? To them, politics is just a game.
Yeah,
even in a crisis, they're going to be able to get the tests they need and the benefits they need. They're going to be fine. And so that's how they run the government, as if everything's pretty much fine.
Right.
And you pointed out yourself, you can make websites that if we had a government that was run by people who were hurting, run by people who were working the hardest, run by people who were on the front lines, that website would have been up in 24 hours. Right? We know that for a fact. Mm-hmm. And so I hope folks who are listening, and you and your wife as well, we are told that finally this website is going to be up April 24th. If you're listening to the podcast, April 24th at 10 p.m., hopefully sooner, but definitely by then. So please do go and apply. And we're told that the benefits will be backdated to whenever you lost your employment. But I also understand why people are skeptical, because we've been told other things in the past. And until we have a government that is run by us and is accountable to people who work the hardest and sacrifice the most, we're going to keep running into these things where even the laws that are well-intentioned will be implemented in a way that doesn't respond and react to those amongst us who are just scraping to get by. So that's okay. The reason it is the way it is, and it's the reason why we're hoping people take this election as an opportunity to change things. Okay,
because we're running out of time, what I want to do, I want to personally pick 3 issues that I feel that are problems in West Virginia. These are in my opinion, and I would like for you just to take maybe 3 to 5 minutes and just share what your plan is. The first issue is fixing the roads in West Virginia.
You bet. So in West Virginia, 10 years ago, there were nearly 1,000 more highway workers than there are now. That's the root problem here, is that we have 1,000 less work. Now we have more highway work than ever before. We have 1,000 less workers. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? The reason is because we have shifted highway work from accountable, unionized state workers to unaccountable, often non-union private contractors that are politically connected. So when you replace an accountable system that's done in-house with an unaccountable privatized system, you get a lot less work for a lot less money. And that's what's going on with our roads, that simply by shifting back to a structure where work was done in-house, where equipment was owned in-house, where workers were accountable to government agencies instead of being bid out, we can do a lot of good in our roads. We also need this corporate crime and political corruption division to end the corruption in our road work. You can see our full plan on roads online as well. It goes through this step by step, where the money comes from and everything. Okay. What's number 2?
Number 2 is to end government waste, which I was reading about this, and this is really baffling. Go ahead.
Sure. Most states have an independent fiscal office, a group of economists that are not part of either party, not controlled politically, that weigh in on any legislation that comes up in the legislature, so that the legislators can say, well, what's going to be the fiscal impact of this? Now, West Virginia, we rely on the fox to guard the hen house. So that we have fiscal notes in West Virginia, but they're defined by the people who write the law. So, of course, they're not reliable. Meanwhile, we also don't have an inspector general, someone who, an office to make sure that the investments we make in things like tax breaks and payment in lieu of taxes, pilot agreements, that there's no oversight to make sure that these policy plans and tax breaks that we give to out-of-state corporations actually do what they say they're going to do. So as a result, we spend obscene amounts of money on out-of-state corporate tax breaks, and we waste an obscene amount of money on things like this couch controversy and things like the millions of dollars spent on insurance on state vehicles that no one was even using. Because we have no one in charge to make sure those things get policed. Again, this is a place, too, for our corporate crime and political corruption division. So we can do it. We know how to do it. Other states have shown the way. We just have to have a government that actually wants to police the corruption and waste. And for too long, we haven't had that kind of government.
One of the things that I saw in the government waste was the state spent $15 million on a what was that, on a server that we're not even using? What was that all about?
Yeah, that's a classic West Virginia thing. So if and when you pay like a what's a good example? Like a speeding ticket or a parking ticket, chances are you're using a middleman company to do so. And that middleman company claims to be based in West Virginia, but isn't. This is a practice that's common in West Virginia that all throughout our government, even when it comes to simple government functions that you could do in-house, like paying a parking ticket or we've run into the problems where the software that the Secretary of State's office uses for us to input our financial information as a candidate is an out-of-state corporation. And over and over again, you see out-of-state companies getting rich off of state government contracts, charging more money than they should, wasting our money, and making sure that more of our wealth leaves the state.
Awesome. That's just insane. Now, the last issue is the most important to me, and it's under your education plan. How can we assure kids the best education possible?
We have to be willing to pay for it. And there are lots of things we can do outside of paying for it, but I want to start there because lots of politicians want to talk about how they're going to make these changes, but never talk about where the money is going to come from.
Right.
And in every one of our plans, you've seen it online, we tell you exactly where the money is going to come from. And make no mistake, there is plenty of money. This is the wealthiest time in West Virginia history. As soon as we make out-of-state corporations and land-holding companies and these giant businesses that are coming in and undercutting our small businesses, as soon as we make them pay their fair share, there's plenty for things like a massive raise for teachers and school service personnel, PEIA benefits for school personnel and teachers. And then we start to get into the other exciting stuff that you can do when you have a fully staffed workforce in our schools, things like smaller class sizes,
right,
and making it so that schools have the resources to be places of healing, not just places of learning. So that means mental health professionals in every school, not just to help serve the kids, but also to take some of the burden off of classroom teachers and to help make sure that the best knowledge we have about childhood trauma are informing our practices in our schools. We can do all of that. And frankly, most of those things are already being done and innovated in West Virginia. We just don't have the resources to spread it statewide because year in, year out, we cut instead of invest in our schools.
You know, one of the things that I was reading on your website that I really liked was, first of all, the mental health professionals. I was actually at a school. It was a large school, 600, maybe it was, I think it was probably in Nashville. And I said, what is one thing, if money wasn't an issue, or what you can do anything you want. What is one thing that you need? And he goes, we need more counselors. And I'm thinking, you know what? He's so right, because here is one person that's dealing with 600 people and all and issues at home and at school and everything else. And then another thing, and I'm just jumping around, but the other thing that I really liked, and I talked with so many teachers, is where you were talking about less time spent on testing, and also to give more time to arts and music and all this. And I'm thinking, man, this is what needs to happen, because when I go into these schools, I don't charge these schools a dime. I go in there and I'll do a concert and I'll talk about bullying. I'll talk about making right choices, or just to try to motivate them. And when I go into school, and like in West Virginia, it's so close and dear to me that I want to make sure that I get to all these kids, and I'm letting them know this. I said, the easiest choice that we can make when things aren't going our way, when things are tough, maybe at home or maybe at a certain class, or maybe in sports or in music, the easiest choice for us to make is to quit. Anybody can quit. And my objective is really just to try to put a fire under their feet and make them start dreaming again. Because I think this, as I go into these schools, their ambition, they don't have any ambition. They're using their parents. They say, I don't know how many times they say my mom and dad, they work at this manufacturing plant, from 9 to 5, and they're happy and everything else. I'm thinking, well, that's good, but what do you want to do? So it's just good to see this plan that you have. Just about the mental health and less time spending on testing and to introduce them to the arts and the music and all that, but which I think is awesome. Well, Stephen, I tell you what, I want to do this. I usually end up with what we call super questions, and I'll ask you a question, and you can just go ahead and give me a short answer, and we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Is that all right with you?
Fire away.
Okay. What's one word that best describes you?
Hopeful.
Now, listen, man, I know I sent these questions to you earlier. I didn't mean to do that. So anyway,
I didn't get a chance to look at them. So
okay.
Fresh.
Okay, good. Okay,
you're good.
And the next question: what is one of your biggest pet peeves? It could be with your marriage, family, with your campaign. But what is one of your biggest pet peeves?
My biggest pet peeve is people who blame the people who are hurting. This is a thing we sometimes see in politics and in West Virginia, is that people will essentially blame victims, blame people who are hurting for their pain. You see people blame people with substance use disorder, and so on and so forth. That is the thing that drives me up the wall. Instead of putting blame on the people who actually have power to do something about it, they put blame on the people who are already carrying the most weight. That's my biggest pet peeve.
Okay. What natural gift would you most like to possess?
I can't sing. I would love to be able to sing.
Okay. Let me see. Who is your favorite band?
I haven't thought in those terms since high school. My favorite band, I mean, this is such a boring answer, but I'd probably say the Beatles.
The Beatles?
Beatles fan. I grew up on my parents' music, yeah.
Yeah, see, man, the Beatles and Rolling Stone, I'm thinking, man, now I'm thinking, I'm more of because I'm a horn player, I'm thinking more of Phil Collins, Earth, Wind, and Fire, everybody has their different tastes, but,
sure.
That's all right. Beatles is good. I mean, okay, next question. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'm a huge fan, and I spend a lot of my time appreciating journalists these days. So the journalists and public defenders. My wife's a public defender. I think that's the most noble profession on the planet. So one of those two, if I could try something.
Okay. And last question, Stephen. Tell me something true that almost nobody agrees with you. Telling somebody like you this. So tell me something true that almost nobody agrees with you on.
Something true that almost no one agrees with me on.
You like smooth jazz.
Yeah, right. Something. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking something that I enjoy that almost no one else does. Man, that's a tough one. I don't really do much outside of parenting, being a husband, and running a campaign. All my hobbies and preferences are long gone.
Well, that's all right. I'll let you go. This is a
nerdy thing. So I'm a huge professional basketball fan.
Right.
That's my sport if I get a chance to do it. And I actually prefer reading about basketball than watching it. I'm like a nerd. I love the statistics and all of that. So that's I think an unusual thing that is absolutely true about me and probably not true about a lot of other people.
Hey, Stephen, you're coming in and out, so I'm not for sure if you're walking around or anything else, but it's I hear you and then I can barely hear you.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Okay, so let's do this. How can people get in touch with you now? I know that you have an awesome website. Are you on Facebook too and social media?
Yes.
What's the best way?
So Stephen at wvcan'twait.com is my email address. My phone is 304-610-6512. That's my cell. We are at wvcan'twait.com on the web, facebook.com/wvcan'twait, and on Twitter at wvcan'twait.
Well, that's about all we have for the Bully Resistance Show. Before we go, I wanted to let everyone know that you can help me fight against bullying by bringing awareness. And how you do that is to share this show on your social media, if it be Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Secondly, if you haven't subscribed to the Bully Resistance Show, it doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is just go to my website at www.davebond.org and click on the banner that says subscribe, and all you will receive is just a notice about a new show that's available. And finally, you can be a monthly supporter as low as $4 per month. And depending on your sponsorship, you can receive either a Song of the Week or CD of the Month, a digital download. And all you have to do is just go to my website at www.davebond.org and click the Patreon banner. So until next time, thanks for listening.